Hello, and welcome to part 3 of Trojan Adventuring Party's 3-part Beginner DM workshop. Today we'll be focusing on exploration and skill challenges. Beginning with skill challenges, the first guiding principle and philosophy that I would like to espouse is that if something is absolutely necessary for your party, it should not, for the story to move forward, it should not be hidden behind a skill challenge. If there is, say, like a note pinned to a wall that the adventurers need to find, don't make them roll perception. Have them just spot the note and have them just react to the note. You'll make things a lot easier on yourself as a DM, and you'll make things a lot easier on the players. That said, skills exist for a reason, and knowing when to adjudicate skill challenges in order to make the situation much worse or better for the players, even if the skill specifically in this one instance shouldn't make or break the story, is a valuable thing to know. So in terms of discussing this, let's break up skill checks into two categories. There is skill checks adjudicated as a response to player agency. This is something like if someone would like to check out a particular artifact to see if it has any arcane roots that they would know about, they would roll Arcana, or you could correct them and say, maybe you can roll Religion about this particular artifact. And then there are responses to DM agency. Very basic example is I'll see a lot of DMs break the passive perception rule and run perception a little bit wrong. Instead of using the player's passive perception, ask for a perception roll from people as they're entering a new area or as someone is stealthing up on them. And that is, though it is not technically by the rules of how to run perception, that is a good example of DM based agency skill challenge. Something that the DM decides is necessary in the situation and is likely to be a little bit more vital to the story. This is where you get the kind of things where it's like anyone looking at this artifact can roll Arcana for me. That's kind of when you want to give hints to the players. And the players pick up on that. Generally, I would advise the DC being lower in these cases when you specifically want the players to succeed in this skill. Although these types of skill challenges can be a way to signal to the players, even if the DC is incredibly high. That can be a fun way to signal to the players. Danger, a route of information, a possible path forward, just based on what kind of skill challenge it is. You don't want your players metagaming about, oh, there's a perception check, so there must be something in the area, kind of thing. But it is good to okay, we made knowledge check religions about this. We didn't find out what it was, but something in the back of mind tickled the back of our mind. We should look into the more religion side of things. So that's one of the things that you can do as a DM adjudicating skill challenges. Another thing to think about is hard skills versus soft skills. And this is where you can start to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to that notion of not wanting to call for a skill challenge when it's not strictly speaking necessary, or when the skill challenge serves as a kind of paywall for the rest of the story. here's where you can move things around a little bit. There are hard skills in Dungeons and Dragons. Perception and stealth are the foremost examples. If you fail on perception or investigation or stealth, you aren't going to find anything. Or you aren't going to sneak past the guards. The guards are going to spot you. This is, even if you get one less than the DC, you are going to fail at this task. There are softer skills in Dungeons and Dragons, though, particularly intelligence-based skills, insight, and charisma-based skills, where, especially with charisma, and we talked about this a little bit in our running social situations workshops, there's a wide gamut that you can run, and the skill check can have varying subtle degrees of efficacy on the situation. But this also applies to knowledge skills. You might know a little bit about something, but not the full picture. Like maybe you want to give away some of the lore surrounding the artifact, but not the origins of the artifact itself, that kind of thing. In these cases, I like to keep degrees of success and degrees of failure in mind. There's generally, you should have a DC in mind. You should always have a set number, a difficulty class in mind whenever you adjudicate a skill challenge. But with soft skills, it is sometimes valuable to think of what you would get from a lower roll, slightly lower than the DC, and what you would get from a way in abundance roll of the DC. With softer skills, you want to have that spectrum and that reward to a certain extent. Players feel a lot better when they get some small percentage of the piece of the puzzle, and it allows you as a DM to filter information in the order that you would like it told. If you have an extensive mythology that you need to share, but your players only roll a 13 on a DC 17 skill check, maybe you can start to tell the start of that mythology, or hint towards something that will be important later on, or give a vital piece of background information that you've been waiting to give for a little while. Those are all the kind of benefits that you as a DM can get from this skill challenge. So skills are fairly straightforward. You read all of the rules on skills, and most of them are intuitive when to apply them. There are a few fancy tricks that you can do, like calling for a skill check with a different ability. That's something that you can do by the rules. It's not common, but you can call like, okay, I would like an acrobatics strength check instead of an acrobatics dexterity check. And you would add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient in acrobatics, but use your strength score instead of your dexterity score to drive that forward. And those are some fancy things that you can do. You can do proficiencies with tools, things like that. There are all kinds of weird things that you can do with skill challenges, but the basic conceit is fairly straightforward. What is less straightforward, and something that I have seen lots of DMs struggle with, is the survival part of D&D. Exploration, survival, terrain. It is a difficult balancing act because there is no getting around the strange paradox that the ranger as a class creates. And some recent revisions and optional class feature replacements have made this slightly less of an issue. But in nature in particular, in D&D, druids and rangers, they have some abilities that are strongly based around survival. but unless you are running a survival type campaign, those don't really come into effect that much. And when they do come into effect, they're almost too hyper effective to the point where it feels like the character is doing nothing, because you can just say, like, okay, well, given my instant feature, we all have enough food, so we've got warmth, we've got a tent, we can track this thing instantly. And then it's also a tough thing playing survival and exploration, because so much of it can be run just by skill challenges too. Survival, stealth, and perception are normally what you need to get by. So what I personally recommend is building out not necessarily a consistent philosophy for how to run exploration, which is different than how I advise approaching other things. I like having a consistent philosophy for combat and a consistent philosophy for social encounters, not changing things up too much, getting good at a certain style. But for exploration, I would say you definitely want to plan exploration and survival based around the characters you have in the campaign. If I know I have a ranger in a campaign, I will play out those survival scenes very differently than if we had a party of all paladins and wizards and warlocks. I would recommend playing a style of survival and exploration that favors your party's strengths, or at least does not discount them. You don't want to make things over easy for the players, but for example, if all you have in terms of scouting is a wizard's find familiar, then you should adapt the situation so that a wizard's find familiar is a viable option for this as a potential go-ahead scout. If you need to search for food and water, the way you're going to handle that is very, very different, whether you've got, a ranger or a druid in the party that can conjure it up or find it instantly. Or whether you have just like a high wisdom cleric with proficiency in survival. That's a very different kind of style. And what I generally recommend is taking a look at the features that your characters have, particularly movement-based features. And I will explain why in a moment. That doesn't seem necessarily linked to survival, but I've found outside of combat, survival and exploration are one of the most rewarding places for movement-based characters if you play it right, if you dig into that movement. But in a party that is heavy on skill challenges, you want to make exploration more of a skill challenge type thing. I've seen systems where you do a series of different skill challenges to find food or to find water or to look along the path or to scare off creatures. And there will be a set number of successes or failures, and things could lead to an encounter. That's one way to run survival in a campaign that is not heavily focused on the nature part of it. You can also run things very grittily. You can, if you don't necessarily have a party that complements survival all too well, and wilderness exploration all too well, one good thing to do is rely on the player's wits rather than the character's mechanical abilities, and just set up situations where the answer is in front of them if the players can figure it out. Make it almost like a puzzle. Perhaps if they knock over a tree, they can get over this river. Perhaps if they manage to kill the snake that's guarding its clutch of eggs there, they can get the eggs for food, that type of thing. Something that's not so reliant on skill-based abilities or the passive effects of more nature-based classes. All in all, I would just recommend allowing your players to, in exploration, do the cool thing they want to do if they are an exploration-based class, and if not, to adapt the way that you do exploration to a way that fits the specific party. Exploration is one of the antsiest things in D&D, one of the most changeable things in 5th edition, I would say. And the way you handle it can be different even from session to session, whatever is fun for your players and complements the playstyle that they are used to in your campaign. Finally, on the topic of movement, I have found that movement-based survival challenges are a particularly good way to encourage passive movement-based abilities. Stuff like getting a climb speed, getting a swim speed, adding an extra couple feet of movements, picking up a teleportation spell here and there, jump distance increases, that kind of thing. You want to reward that kind of niche thing that your players are building around. So let them do awesome stuff. You should, in combat, let them do awesome stuff with their movement-based abilities. You should let them do really cool stuff with movement, because that is so rewarding sometimes, to have a character that can just traverse the entire battlefield in a matter of moments. It's sometimes, I've found, more rewarding than doing damage. But in a survival-based scenario, build out these scenarios where there's a balancing act needed along a rope over a chasm. There's a raging river where a swim speed would be very helpful. There are encounters in the wild and particular paths and difficult terrains and varied obstacles in front of you where a movement-based ability, like the kind that monks get, or the kind that you can get with certain feats or races, all of those come into play, and the characters that took them are rewarded for taking them, and then have an exciting challenge on their hands when the rest of the party that didn't take them are at a significant disadvantage. This applies for most things. This is not just movement-based abilities, although movement-based abilities are very common, which is why I covered them specifically. This is for all kinds of passive abilities that are generally related to the environment and the terrain around you, and sensing direction, weather, that kind of thing. You want to give your players the option to and the opportunity to use all of these abilities, and to feel good about their choices in game when those choices aren't always about doing the most damage in a combat scenario. So, while it may be difficult to craft your own exploration philosophy, I would highly recommend doing so, having a set way that you know you're going to approach exploration that is tailor-made to the specific party that you are running. Put in the extra work, look at your character's abilities, and make sure that your players are getting the opportunity to use niche abilities like a storm sorcerer changing the wind. Abilities are rewards when you use them, and it almost feels like a negative sometimes to have really niche abilities on a character that don't help a situation. It feels like a loss of an opportunity, like you could have been doing something else. So reward your players for their niche abilities instead of punishing them. And with how mutable and all-encompassing exploration is, I would recommend using exploration as a place to use all of those weird little abilities, because you can engineer whatever you want out there in the wild. Thank you for tuning in to the third workshop of our 4-part DM series. I hope you enjoyed this, and be on the lookout for our 4th and final workshop.